Check it out, today I'm going to be bringing you a review of the GROG Full Metal Paint. I have a solid 200ml refill bottle here, as well as a 10 and a 25mm mop. GROG offers the full metal paint in a wide range of mops, as well as some even short stacked ones, and some metal tips and whatnot. But today we've got just the 10 and the 25 in both the regular nibs. Then we also got the refill bottle to reload these up and see how maybe mixing some colors works, as well as how long each of the paints last. So taking a closer look here at the refill bottle, it's basically just clear plastic, a little metal rim on top, and then there's a little mixing ball inside. I've already found that the mixing balls are going to be very important in this. This paint tends to settle quite a bit, so we're definitely going to want to make sure we shake it up quite a bit before getting started. The same deal is pretty much true over here on the 10mm. Nice, really soft plastic body. The contour in here makes it really easy for holding, and I'm sure I'm going to be able to squeeze just fine as I write. You can see the center of the body is thinner than the butt ends, so that makes for holding quite a bit easier. And under the hood, so we got the mop nib here, 10mm wide. You can juice that up, and it seems like it's got a nice valve in here. 25mm obviously has quite a bit wider of a body and a mildly stiffer end on it. The nib on here is quite a bit bigger and also has the pump action valve. I got all of these GROG products through bombingscience.com. I'll have links in the description of the video for you to head over and check out these exact products, as well as some of the other GROG offers. So as a little bit of an extra bonus here, I grabbed some Mohair nibs from GROG. These are supposed to work great on some harder surfaces, so we're going to definitely try this out on maybe some brick and some really coarse wood to get a better idea about how the nib works out on rough surfaces. The refill bottle and the mop are recommended to be used on smooth surfaces. I'm sure these Mohair nibs are going to help us beef it up and really get using on those tougher stuff. So getting a close look here on the label, we can see it's an alcohol-based pigment paint. So what that means is this is going to be a little bit thinner body than some of our maybe latex or acrylic-based paints, but it's also going to have some pretty high pigments. You can see we also have a glossy finish here, so I'm going to guess that this stuff's going to work really great on metal surfaces as named. Now originally the full metal paint was only offered in white and silver, and GROG recently put out the full color line that's about 20 colors across the board. And they do advertise that you can mix the pigments between colors, so I'm excited to see what maybe some of our medium ground colors can come out to be. And one final note about the formula is that the paint is also xylene free, so anybody concerned about using this at an indoor setting should be much better off than some of those harsher paints. That pretty much covers the background and the formula of the paint. I'm sure I'll talk more about it as we go, but let's get down to the workshop and kick this off. I'm going to start in with the flash yellow on some paper. Let's see how it works. So my absolute first impression of these is these drips are not going to really run out of the mop without you really squeezing on the bottom. These were all really deliberate, and you can see the first couple ones I didn't really do much at all. And then here as we go through the E, added a little bit more pressure and got a bunch more drips. And then again with the underline I really ramped it up to get a bunch more drips on there. But by all means it wasn't like this was running off the page. So what that means is this paint might hold up a little bit longer than some stuff that's going to drip and run really, really fast. So if we take a look at the underside of the C, you can see some slicking between the pigment and the actual body of the paint. We'll let this dry and see how that totally comes out at the end, but my guess is it's just leaching into the paper, and then on like a metal surface or whatnot, that just allows it to carry the pigments a little bit easier. Now although there's clearly a ton of pigment in this stuff, it's not the thickest of bodies, so you might have some of this oiling effect on surfaces that allow it to leach out a little bit. And basically what that is it's just the medium that the pigments are sitting in, and it's able to actually saturate and spread into the paper more easily than the pigments themselves. So I'm going to jump over to a metal surface that also has a little bit darker of a background than the white paper. For that we can always go back and add that red paint into this once we do try out the lighter colors on some other darker surfaces. So let's see how the yellow and white perform on some aluminum. So somewhat surprisingly, this is a little bit more transparent than I anticipated. You can see somewhat of the gray coming through from the aluminum. Then actually in sections over here where we have two lines coming together and extra pigment running together, you can see more of that pigment coming out. Now yellows typically have the hardest time with opacity, so let's check out the white and see how that holds up. Normally with whites they add a ton of extra pigment in just because it generally has a lot of hard times as well, so I have some high hopes for its performance. So once again, the white is also in the 25mm bottle. These tags are going to cover quite a bit more area. So you can definitely see we're maintaining that glossy finish like I mentioned on the bottle, and it's quite a bit harder to get those drips on this mop. So I had to squeeze quite a bit more on the 25mm bottle than I did on the 10. The drips here are still clearly present, but it kind of seems like an all or nothing thing. Sections like this where we've got quite a few drips that are all the same length. So that means the baseline of pressure to get some drips is quite a bit high, so I'm not squeezing much more to get larger drips in other sections. The only reason these ones are running off is you can see we've got more paint coming down right above them from those other parts of the letters. That allows the paint to keep flowing down the surface because there's kind of already a path carved out with the other paint. See, we got a little bit of mixing here between that yellow streak that went down back through the E. And generally we're having a little bit more defined opacity here, still consistent across all the letters. It's covering up the gray of the aluminum a little bit better. On paints that don't have great pigment mixing, you're going to find really blotchy sections that are either less covered or either extra covered and they're extra opaque on top of the surface. Here we've got a super smooth application, and then the areas that are doubled up are just because of the drippings from the top layer. So the yellow's drying up nicely, probably needs another 5 minutes on it. We're going to let this totally dry and then come at it with some acetone and whatnot and see how easily this stuff cleans off of metal surface. And now we can move on to testing this out on some cardboard, which is really going to soak it in and see how these pigments hold up. Before we get started on the cardboard, I can say we've used just up to the label line here for those first 2 tags. So by that standard, we're probably going to get 8 or 10 tags out of one fill on this. So I definitely wasn't expecting this paint to set in quite as drastically as it did on the cardboard. We were still able to maintain drips on the cardboard, but you can see the body of the paint soaked in a bunch of those really fine pigments directly into the back of the cardboard. This isn't nearly the opacity we saw on the paper or metal test. I've got some black plastic off to the side, so let's give that a test as it's not nearly as porous. It's pretty clear that this is not going to work great on any material that's going to soak it totally in. The drip test is designed to show how hard you actually have to press in order to get drips flowing from the mop. So these first drips were somewhat late spawning after leaving it for a little while. The paint had enough time to set up and then settle down to the bottom. That was with the standard marker grip on that section, pretty much squeezing as hard as I can. And then only once I reversed my grip to hold it with my entire palm was I able to get significant drips coming out of the mop. The 10mm on the other hand, I was able to just have the pen grip the whole time and get some super crazy drips. In the yellow section you can see some pitting between the yellow pigment and the black background. You can see there's some small little voided areas where you can see just the entire plastic right through. That's because the paint's having a little bit of a hard time bonding to all of the surface. But here with the white, where we've got a bunch more of that paint and pigment coming down, you can see that it's totally covering the surface just fine. It might be a little bit hard to register on camera, but the white paint actually has quite a bit more volume off the surface of the black, and that I think has a lot to do with how much paint's actually on the surface. We'll have to then see how the red holds up in comparison to the yellow, and if we just need extra paint on the surface to get a little bit more opacity with the paint. So I'm going to pop up the nib and refill a little bit of red in here. Make sure the red is totally shaken before you get it mixed in here. There's also a mixing ball in here which helps for that. Now I'm going to pour slowly not to lose that mixing ball into the mop. It's like I overfilled a little bit, send some back in. Wouldn't be a review without getting quite a bit messy. Now we got some red in here, let's give this a test on some paper. I took it easy on the drips for this, but we can still see we got nice solid ones down at the bottom. Really digging those. So I'm actually going to scroll up a little bit and let's see how big of a drips we can actually get. So I definitely rolled this one too quick and actually had quite a bit transfer and stamp on to the next roll. Colors look a little muted and a little messy off to the side. Now's a good time to try the red on the aluminum and see how the opacity holds up there. I like that a lot. Let's hit up another one on the left side. So we can immediately see there's way more opacity with the red than with the yellow color. That's a good sign for all the other standard colors that are offered in this line. We're clearly seeing great from the white and red, so having the yellow in there is going to show us that that's probably the least opaque color that we're ever going to find for this line. You can see a little bit of bleed through from the other colors into the red, but the background of the metal surface is barely noticeable now that you got the tag on top of it. It is very drippy, so use caution on smaller tags on the super smooth surface, but all in all I'm very happy with the colored selection. I have a little bit of room left on that plastic, so let's give that a try before we knock on some harder surfaces. Looks like we got a nice pink now. So starting off, I tried to go so light that I could get still a smooth color, but also pass by it, and it still seemed to just drip enough to get going on there. The tail end of the E might have been the only part that didn't have much drip. Any of these really vertical lines had enough paint coming down to them that it all fed and then bled down. And even in the sections of the mixed white and red where I went super slow and didn't press too hard, we're still getting a bunch of drips. It's now thin enough to get going even without much pressure. So unlike in the original white where there wasn't much dripping at all, the body of the other colors in this line are going to be a little bit thinner than that white. This will require much less pressure to actually achieve drips. So keep that in mind, this is going to be a drippy marker in most of the colors that it's offered. We're seeing very similar setting effects here. The pink is being saturated into that cardboard quite easily, and for that reason we're also not seeing many drips at all. The opacity really isn't there for me on this porous surface, so I would stick to something smoother that's not going to let it set in as much. Before I swap out the nib, let's take a look at see how the first one's holding up. There are a few more fibers exposed, and that's probably from the cardboard surface. That's a little bit rougher than those other two I was using. But altogether this looks just fine. Let's see how the mohair holds up. You can see the fibers on here are much longer, so they're actually going to play around a little bit. I haven't used one of these in a while, but the last I remember they do give a little bit sloppier of a tag. Let's see if that's still true with this. This is some untreated wood. It's definitely plenty rough, and it should be a good test to see how well this holds up. So I don't have to use much pressure at all to still get a pretty solid line here. You can see I blew out the edges of these, squeezing too hard. The nib's looking alright. It doesn't look like we lost too many fibers. You're definitely going to need that reverse grip if you plan to get any drips off of it on such a surface that's so unprimed and so rough. I'm not sure why I had such an easy time getting all these drips originally, and then as the nib gets going and probably a little bit more roughed up, you don't get as much flow out of that. But altogether, mohair looks great, not too much noticeability. Now this stuff is super rough. I would have probably ground through that original nib in one tag, if that. Unprimed wood might not be too common out in the wild, but you're definitely going to have a chance to use this on some other stuff if you grab one of those nibs. This is a super light backdrop, so a darker wood might give you slightly different results, but altogether, really impressed with how the mohair held up. So I'm not getting as much flow as I want to out of the mohair nib, so I'm going to take the regulator out of the inside and see how that helps. Regulators just restrict the flow a little bit, just a small little plastic piece. Let's see if that flows a little bit better. So it's mildly better than that pulse tag, but nothing too special. If you're going to use the mohair nib, I would definitely stick to those rough surfaces. You can already see just way better coverage using that stock nib, not to mention way better drips as well. So I got a little repurposed spray bottle here, but it's got mineral spirits inside. Let's see how it holds up against getting rid of this paint. So there's definitely no staining here from the white and yellow. Let's see about the red. So it also looks like you'd be able to buff a metal surface totally clean. Not exactly any direct staining properties here with the paints. Unless you have something like steel wool, I don't think you'd be able to actually rub this off with just, agitating it with the sponge or an abrasive brush. So as a final consensus, I really did enjoy using these GROG squeezers. The paint and mops in general kind of fall in a strange area to our typical mops. On the one end of the spectrum, we have high staining mops that are going to be great for tagging and hold up well under weather and buffing conditions. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have paint-based stuff that are going to give you really crisp and smooth tags with high opacity on a good surface. And kind of perfectly enough, it falls right in between those two descriptions and being an alcohol-based marker, but it has a ton of pigment involved. Similar to the pigments we see in acrylic-based mops, this is going to give us some pretty good opacity on those lighter surfaces. And by design, the full metal paint is really idealized for using it on aluminum surfaces. I could also see this paint working great on a primed wall, but that aluminum surface was just hard to beat with how smooth tags came off. And even though the surface was smooth and I was moving fast, coverage was really spot on. I can see in the comments that people are probably going to point out the opacity of that yellow. Since this paint falls into that weird medium category, I would say this is some really solid performance out of a yellow color. If you have any experience with full-on yellow alcohol-based stuff that's designed for staining, you're really going to get next to zero opacity with those kind of markers. This is a huge step in the right direction for getting some solid yellow colors on the same alcohol-based kind of dripping effects. So after maybe the 20 tags in this video, I would expect that I have pretty much a full refill bottle left, so we can estimate that you might get about 10 tags out of each marker. Throughout all those tags, the hardware of the mop is holding up great, so I definitely recommend getting refills to save some money. Those extra mohair nibs were a cool addition into this review. I enjoyed testing them on that unprimed wood, and it did give a different result as it was a little bit rougher of a surface. The rough surface wasn't as easy to tag on, but by any means, it's at least opening up another door to use these markers on. After writing on unprimed surfaces for quite a while, you're probably going to run through that mohair nib, so keep that in mind. Those additions are only a couple bucks, so it's a great addition for the mix. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I picked these up off of bombingscience.com. I'll have links to all the products in the description of the video if you guys want to check them out. I only tested out the 3 colors here, but there's about 20 in the whole line, so be sure to head over there and see what else they have to offer. A big thank you for sticking it out through the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, spray that like button or consider joining the crew by subscribing. I post weekly videos that are art related, a lot of reviews recently and some speed arts and whatnot, so be sure to check out some of the other videos that I've recently posted. Last week I did a DIY custom snack bag and the outcome was pretty sweet. If you have any comments or questions about the review, feel free to hit me in the comment section down below. That's going to do it for me, guys. Peace.